I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Saturday, wherever in the world you may be, whether it's morning, whether it's afternoon, or possibly you're well into Sunday, wherever you are. Thank you so much, as always, for your support. Thank you so much for liking, sharing, and following our content. And hopefully you're finding great value in a lot of the wonderful educators that have come in through here, wonderful creatives that have come through here as well, sharing their knowledge, their passion, and sharing their successes and sharing even their obstacles, but to help you get inspired to express your creativity as well, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's on your own as a hobby. So, whatever the case is, thank you as always for joining us. And I am really excited about today's show because today's show is really something that is near and dear to me because it has grown into my passion, which is podcasting. And there's definitely no doubt about that as you see me post on social media as far as podcast episodes and just podcasting altogether. The wonderful guest that I have here today is somebody that is definitely worth a follow and can definitely help you get over your imposter syndrome and just click record. And so today I'm really excited to talk to this amazing creator, content creator, podcaster as well. His name is Lloyd George. Lloyd, how are you this morning?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I know we've been planning this forever, so I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited that you are here. As we talked a little bit about, pre-chat, I am a longtime follower, on TikTok. You put out some great videos that are short and sweet, very informative for anybody that is out there that is possibly considering starting a podcast, or maybe they don't know where to start. You definitely break it down and you definitely also inspire. And I love the fact that you even do accountability with a lot of your followers as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But for our audience members, Lloyd, that are joining us this morning, some of them are educators, some of them are also creatives. But if you can give us a brief introduction about yourself and your context within the creative podcasting space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I first found my passion for podcasting in roughly about 2016. That's the first time I listened to a podcast ever. And I fell in love. I realized that there's no other medium like podcasting. I decided to start my own podcast for the first time around 2018, 2019. And so that's the first time I produced my own podcast. And then around December of 2021, I decided I was going to start helping other people start their podcasts. I was going to create content online, sharing bite-sized tips for other people to start their podcasts. And so since then, I've sort of become like the podcast guy, the podcast hype man, the podcast accountability guy, just because I've been so outwardly passionate about encouraging people to start a podcast.
Excellent. And I see that. And I love, like, that's one of the things that when I ran into your content on TikTok, just really the passion that you have for it. No gatekeeping at all whatsoever. You're just really just sharing knowledge and people are responding well. And the fact that you interact with your audience, which is all part of podcasting. And we'll talk a little bit about that because really today's conversation, I really want to center it about reasons why you should start a podcast. And so I just want to make sure because I do have some friends that are possibly interested in starting a podcast, but sometimes they're like, well, I don't know where to start. There's already a lot of people there in that particular niche and so on. And so I encourage them, in the same way that I started in this education space. There's so many great edu podcasters that are out there. But for myself, it's like there's always an audience because we may present things in a different way, different perspectives. So let's go ahead and start with that in a little bit. So, for example, somebody that has just, again, same comments, it's a friend of mine. They don't know where to start because they're scared that that particular niche is already maybe just so many other creators are out there doing this. what would be your number one recommendation as far as kind of getting over that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's a two-sided coin. The first side of the coin is the psychological aspects, right, of that question, right? If I still to this day hear people say, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I still hear people say, I'm going to write a book. I hear people say, I'm going to become a musician. And those are all areas where there's millions of YouTubers, right? And no one ever says, like, I think there's too many YouTube channels. Like, we just started, right? We understand that the number of YouTube channels that exist don't limit what we can do, what we can put out. This is a creative art form, meaning that whatever we put out will be different than what's already out there. And so I think that's the psychological aspect, this idea that there may be too many, even though podcasting is the only thing we do that or say that about, right? And so I think it's just it's something, a mental roadblock in our mind that we can overcome. The flip side of the coin is factually, it's just not true. Like the actual data proves that that's not true. Even though there may be 4 million podcasts in the App Store, depending on which, if you're talking about Apple or Spotify, the data suggests that the longer you podcast, the less competitive podcasts that they are. So, for instance, the number of podcasts that get to 21 episodes, it's such a small percentage of podcasts. I don't remember the exact number, but it's almost like most podcasts will not make it to their 21st episode. And so there's that, right? The longer you continue to podcast, the lonelier it will get at the top, for lack of better words, right? And then we think about, well, how many podcasts are there that are past 21 episodes and that are in my niche and that are in my country and that have my personality and that have my equipment? And you probably realize that there's not that many competitors, that podcasting is still very early in its infancy. 5 years from now, there'll probably be triple the number of podcasts that there are. And so if you're starting a podcast now, technically this is still considered very early. And if you're a minority, podcasting is not even mainstream. So if you're, an African American, for example, podcasting is not even mainstream in like the African American community yet, but it will be in the next probably 3 to 5 years. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity right now, and it's still so early.
Yeah, and that's something I love what you said there, at least as bringing the data. And oftentimes I've heard you said 21 episodes. When I first started 2 years ago on April 10th, 2020, they said, some shows don't even make it past their seventh episode.
Yep.
So when I broke the seventh, I was like, all right, I'm on track. And then all of a sudden, here comes 20. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, 100. And today is 150. And it's just all about being consistent. And I think that one of the things that you mentioned, you're absolutely correct, because although there may seem like there are huge numbers in that specific niche, because not many will make it past 21, it does really shrink down the number of podcasters that are out there doing this consistently, which obviously gives you more opportunity to be listened to and to get into people's ears. So that is definitely something that's great to think about.
Absolutely. And I find that, being consistent is probably the number one way to grow your audience. And I want to ask you about that. I mean, what do you feel like has, made it easy for you, not made it easy, but made you able to get to 150? What has led you to be consistent?
Well, it's like you said, it's just being consistent for myself. And I'm glad that you asked that, because that way people can hear, this perspective, because oftentimes people will see somebody on social media and they're like, oh man, like they just have it together. But they don't understand the hours that go into you're really just seeing a polished product of the work that goes behind it. But really it's just being passionate about what I do, passionate about my niche. And although I started kind of just blocking myself in sort of into the education space, because I do love creativity and I love expressing creativity, and I want my educator friends to continue to express their creativity. I've kind of started going out and finding creators and creatives on the TikTok space, even in the education space. And really my mission, my vision, and my passion didn't start off as what the show is now. Back in 2020, it started off where I wanted to create a show where, because of pandemic, schools were closed down, teachers didn't know how to, manage online learning. So I wanted to bring in content experts. Hey, what are you doing? Show us this platform and so on. But in my mind, kind of got into that imposter syndrome of, well, there's already a lot of people that are doing that. There's already people that are great at what they're doing. And so I kind of just organically moved into, hey, I want to hear your story. Like, how are you doing? Because at the time, the focus was, I need to learn this, I need to learn that. But I don't think anybody was really asking educators, how are you feeling? Like, what's going through your mind? What are some of the obstacles you're seeing? What are some of your successes? And really getting their story. And for a while, I really felt I was kind of, let me see, not really fitting into the education space, just because I know my show's called My Ed Tech Life, but we'll talk about some tech, but it's all about amplifying creator and educator stories. So I kind of felt like, man, I'm kind of like not either here or there. But I just said, you know what, I'm going to roll with this. And because I love what I'm doing and I'm passionate about it and I believe in what I'm doing, uh, thankfully for all the support of educators and creatives that are out there, have been able to make it to 150 episodes because I'm continually looking through social media, finding creatives such as yourself and saying, hey, would you like to be on the show? And just DMing people and looking. And sometimes I'll get people that'll contact me asking, hey, can we be on the show? And I'm like, of course, that'd be great. So
Right.
it's been great to just be able to be a hustler. And that's just, I'm hustling. I want to get people, I want to get their perspectives. I want them to share their stories. And I want people to know that there's a platform here that is available to them to share their passion. So that's really what drives me, and that's every Saturday morning I wake up and I'm like, man, this is going to be an awesome day because I'm going to learn, and the people that are going to listen to this are going to learn also as well. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. I think you summed up that perfectly. And it requires just a lot of creativity and hard work and persistence because, you may be messaging just like us. We were trying to plan this probably for the last 3 months. So I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's one of the things. But yeah, so and the reason I'm just thankful for this episode too, because like I mentioned, I have a great friend of mine who I posted something yesterday on Instagram, 5 reasons why I love podcasting. And, he mentioned, he's like, well, I want to do this, but he just felt kind of intimidated and so on. But, I'm just willing to help. I said, hey, I can help you out and so on. And so that's great that what you shared to help alleviate some of those nerves and so on that people
Yeah.
may have. So, okay, so now it's that psychological, we're talking about data and so on. So now what is with your interaction that you have with your audience on TikTok? Once they get past that, what do you see the next immediate roadblock for them is once they said, okay, I'm going to click record, I'm ready to go, and now what? So,
Yeah.
what has been your experience?
So I think this is where my opinion maybe differs than lots of other experts in the podcast industry. Between the time when you decide that I'm going to start a podcast and the time you actually record, what happens in between there is sort of like where I fundamentally disagree with lots of experts. A lots of podcast experts will tell you like, okay, the first thing, like the two things you need is to decide why you want to start a podcast and what your podcast is about. And the reason they're telling you to decide what you like, why you want a podcast is they need you to have some sort of like end goal. Like, do you want to make money? Do you want to, do you want to tell stories? What about this medium is like impressive to you? And so I think that, I completely throw all of those things out the window and I'm just like pick up your phone, record and just talk about whatever's on your mind that day, right? I'm more like even if you don't know what you're going to talk about, if you don't have a niche, then that's what you should talk about. And I tell people all the time on my page, like if someone comments and says, I decided I want to start a podcast, but I don't know what I want to talk about, I'll tell them your first episode should just be introducing yourself. Your second episode should be talking about the fact that you don't know what you want this podcast to be about. Right. So it's just like to me, it's just like turn it on, hit record. Like don't overthink this. And the more you do that, the more you podcast, the more you'll start to understand like what you enjoy talking about, what you want to talk about, the things that bring you joy and fulfillment, the things that people enjoy listening to. You don't have any of that data before you start. And so my thing is just like start and you'll get better at it each in your case, every Saturday, you'll get a little better.
Yeah, and that's something that's some great advice. I have a friend of mine, Chris Nessie. who is also an outstanding podcaster. Shout out to House of Ed Tech. And he's really, after I got him on the show, I think he was early on in the show, and he told me the story too, that he had so much to talk about, and he said, I was talking my wife's ear off pretty much. And she said, you know what, you should start a podcast and just click record. That way you can go ahead and just share out everything that you have on your mind and so on. And so I agree with that advice, although some people may say, well, no, you really have to start here and be a little bit more strategic, end goal in mind. I didn't start thinking about that until probably maybe 120 episodes in, because really for me it was just, hey, I just want to get educators' voices amplified. I want to get creatives on and give them a platform where they can get their creations amplified, their creativity, whatever it is that they're doing. And then now I'm slowly kind of saying, okay, now that I've kind of established the platform, now I'm kind of working backwards and saying, okay, now what can I do to get 1% better every day? And now it's more of, okay, let's see if we can focus on, just specifics, as far as sponsors, or, focus on little things here and there that are just going to make the production value a little bit better, the social media aspect and so on. And so being a one-man show, that can definitely be overwhelming where you hit all those parts. So I want to ask you, because of the work that you've done and your presence on social media, how do you find that balance or that time to create and put stuff out continually and consistently to continue to have your audience, follow you? Because I know that, at least from what I've seen, you're also a one man production and your show. So what are some tips that you may share with some of our, future podcasters that may be listening?
Yeah, that's such a great question because I think because podcasting is so heavily dependent on consistency, you want to get a system to record, edit, and publish that is very easy and efficient, something that's easily repeatable. And so I think that if I spend any time on anything, it would be that. How do I record or set up my recording system in a way that's so easy that I could set it up in 5 minutes and just do it without thinking? And so, for one thing, I recommend, like, if you're starting your first podcast, you should use tools like Anchor, right? Where it requires no setup, it requires not a lot of time, not a lot of money. You could do it in an instant, straight from your phone, and it publishes it for you. I mean, it's just like the easiest way to record. And so, for me, I know what makes it easy for me to record. I know what day I need to record. I know that I need to be recording on Saturday. I know that, I need to be doing it virtually to be consistent. All of these things are things that podcasters should be thinking about and may be different for them. For other people, for instance, it may be that you need to do a solo podcast because you may not have time to email guests, for example. So those are some of the things that podcasters need to think about, just in terms of, what is going to make it efficient and easy for me to record, edit, and publish consistently. That's the easiest way to manage running a podcast as like a solo podcaster.
Excellent. Well, good morning, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to give a shout out to Amanda Macias, also, who's a great supporter of the show. So thank you so much
Hi,
for
Amanda.
joining us. All right. So yeah, and that's one of the things that at the very beginning, I was a little overwhelmed, that I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this with such a heavy workflow. But, once I discovered, Anchor, and then now one of the things that I do, and again, maybe just through your experience and tell me what you think, really what I do is I tell people, because I am just a one person show, I don't have a lot of time to go in and edit audio as much as others. And quite frankly, I don't have the finances to go and outsource that. So what I do is pretty much, it's what you see is what you get, what you hear is what you get. And I just upload everything immediately up to Anchor, because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, as long as the sound is good, but I just want people to see, like, this is a true conversation. Like, if there's a tech difficulty, hey, tech happens. And in my mind, it's always been like, it's just genuine, raw audio. This is the conversation. Here you go. And at first, people were like, well, people don't like that. You need to spend some time editing. I said, I don't have that time. And I just love being consistent and just talking to people. So I just download the audio. So we'll be done here. I'll download it. I'll clean it up now a little bit more, because now I have some tools that'll help with my workflow. So I'll kind of clean it up just a little bit, but immediately within the hour, it's already up and I just share it because to me, it's like I want to get it into people's ears and hands as soon as possible so they can glean from it all these knowledge nuggets that our guests are sharing. So those are some of the things that I have done to help my workflow. And of course, creating the art, doing that weeks in advance, the Calendly links, and so on. Those have been very helpful. So again, trying to get 1% better every day. It has really helped get that workflow nice and tight. Where a one man show is not too bad anymore as it once was.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think one other point that I want to highlight is there is really big successful podcasts that will literally they'll publish their regular episode and then they'll charge a premium episode on Patreon, and it's the behind the scenes. It's like the raw episode. So you get to sort of hear all of the errors, all of the mistakes, all of the things, and people literally pay for that. And I think this idea that people like things that are like authentic, they like things that are not like overly edited. They like things that they like getting to see sort of like the behind the scenes and the how you do this. And so I love that approach that you just shared.
Yeah, and like I said, that's interesting that I never knew that there was a market for that. And these are some of the things that I'm glad that you're sharing because I want people to know too as well that, for example, I know that this is my passion, but up until now, for since April 10th, 2020, this has been all out of pocket, and just any little merch that people buy, on the store will go back into the subscriptions and goes back straight into the show. I mean, it's not like I'm driving around in nice cars or anything. It's really because I just want to reach more people, but I had no idea that there are people that would pay for the raw, unedited version of these things. So let's talk about maybe that, like a little bit of the monetization, because obviously, as much as this could be a passion, we know that subscription fees, platform fees, and all of those fees do accumulate quite fast, anywhere from monthly to annual fees. What would be some of your, I guess, beginner tips for people to possibly start monetizing their podcasts once they've been established?
Yeah, great question. So I view podcast monetization in three steps, right? And they all sort of work together. The first step is you need to start making some money so that you can pay for all of your podcast expenses, right? For example, you just mentioned there's podcast hosting, your website hosting, whatever software you have. Let's just assume that all of your podcast bills are, let's just say $100 a month, for example. So you need to make money first to pay for that $100 a month so that you're not coming out of pocket anymore. The second step is, okay, I now make enough money to pay all of my podcast bills. I now need to make money to reinvest in my podcast, to grow my podcast. This is now money for marketing your podcast. And then the third is just sort of like, I now need to make money from my podcast to pay myself. Maybe at first just as a side hustle, but eventually full time, right? And so these three steps sort of build on each other. So if I was like starting a podcast right now, what I would literally do is I'd try and start with the first step. So you basically need $100 a month. I'd go to a small business that is in my niche and say, hey, I will let you be the only sponsor on my podcast for $25 a week. That's basically $25 per episode. That is such a small amount of money to that business, but what they potentially get being like the only sponsor in your podcast could be pretty helpful, right? Because even if they get one client from that, they'll recoup their money easily, right? And so, and when I first started my podcast in 2018, I started that podcast in 2018 and I stopped it in 2020 and then started a new podcast in 2021. But when I started that first podcast in 2018, I literally made almost $5,000 doing that. I had no listeners or anything just yet. I reached out to a brand and I was like, hey, what would you pay me to be the sponsor of this entire season? You would be the only sponsor and I'd put you in every single episode. And that's how I ended up making the 5,000. And I literally didn't know that's what they were going to say. I just said like, what's your budget? And that's what they told me. So I think a lot of people will be shocked if they reach out to businesses and ask them, would you be interested in being a sponsor? And so the moment you do that, you reach out to a business, you say, will you sponsor for $25? Boom. You're now making $100 per month. You're paying your bills. You can grow your audience without coming out of like your own pocket. And as your audience grows, you'll be able to charge more each time, right?
Wow, that's You just make it sound so simple, but those steps, I think too is I've been scared to reach out, obviously, because people may say, nah, or they may not find value, or they may not see the value there. So before we get into that next question that I want to ask is, how do you share the value with the company or the sponsor of what you have? I wanted to ask you. So, for example, that company says, "Yeah, all right, Lloyd, we'll definitely sponsor you. We'll put and you put them into their episode." In what ways did you, share the sponsor aside from maybe being on your webpage, showing like show sponsor? What are some ways that you, I guess, advertised for that company within the podcast?
So this is similar to the question earlier, where it's like a double-sided answer, right? What I've realized is the first 50% of people, not the first, but just like 50% of the people, they do not they don't care. They're just doing it to support you because they like you. They don't care about your data. They don't care about how many listeners you have. They don't care about where you're going to put it. They literally are just doing it to support you. And I'd ask people to sponsor and they'd give me the money and I'd be like, "Well, I'm going to put you here, I'm going to put you here, and I'm going to send you the analytics, and is there anything you want me to are you hoping to get listeners or followers from this or customers? Like, what why are you doing this?" And they would literally wouldn't respond. They just send me the money and just say, "Thanks. We don't send us anything back. Great. We're good." And so that just showed me that, like, it's not to them. To them, it was not about the fact like what they could get out of this sponsorship, and more about the fact that they like what I stood for, they liked my brand, and they just wanted to support me. The second 50%, with those people, the way that I showed value, these people do care, right? They want to know, okay, well, what am I getting? How do I prove that I'm going to recoup my money? And so for those people, there's a few different strategies that you can use to um, make sure you're viewed in the right light. So, for example, at the time when I got that $5,000, my downloads were very low. Like I had done like 4 test episodes, but I really didn't have any like real downloads. I maybe had a total of like 200 total downloads for like my entire season. And so what I instead of saying like, "Hey, here's how many downloads I had," what I did was I looked at every single person that had agreed to be a guest on that season. I went to their social media. I added up all the followers that they have. So some of them had like 10,000 followers, 30,000 followers, 50, 100,000. One of them had like 800,000 followers. I got all their followers, added all of those numbers together, and said, all of the people that are going to be on my podcast have a total following on Instagram of 16 million, for example. I think the number was closer to like 4 or 5 million. And so they have a total of X amount of million of followers. So I'm assuming that if I publish this episode and they promote it on their page, it could potentially get seen by X million number of people. And so you get what I'm saying? Like that, it's in my best interest to sell myself that way. It's not in my best interest to say, this is how many downloads I have. So you want to find those sorts of like data points for you. Like, what about your podcasting is amazing? And if you have smaller guests on your podcast and you can't do what I did, maybe the thing you're doing is saying, the ed tech industry is predicted to grow by 3 million next year or by 3x next year. Don't you want to be at the forefront of that? I'm giving you an opportunity to sponsor in a podcast that would highlight your brand as a leader in the space, right? Like, so find like some of those data points that's going to make them view your podcast as the thing that's going to help them get there.
Wow. That is amazing right now. Just the ideas that have gone through my mind right now and thinking like, I don't know why I never thought about this. And again, it just goes back to, in that sense, that imposter syndrome, just that fear of rejection and so on. And because I'm going to tell you some of my experiences have been is where I have gotten emails of people that are like, "Oh, we would like to sponsor your show." And I'm like, "Great, that's wonderful." And, we get into a conversation, but then, and I want to ask your experience with this, but then it's like, "Well, we can't pay you, but we can share our product with you for free." And I'm just like, well, the product doesn't pay the subscription or the bills and things
Right.
of that sort. So what has been your experience through that in the very beginning, and how do you maybe politely just maybe reject those, or have you had the opportunity to flip that and in a way saying, okay, well, we will definitely give you, some funding for it, not just product?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that happens quite a bit. And so I get a lot of emails just saying like, hey, we want to send you free products. Can you, write a review, share it, talk about us? And I decline all of those just because that's not the kind of work I want to do. And then I find that the people I do want to work with, if I was in your position, I think what I would do is I would just make it a practice in the same way that you've been incredibly consistent with your podcast. I think the same applies to sponsorship. So, for example, I maybe pitched like 10, no, maybe like eight big brands this year that I said, like, these are like my dream brands. I would love to work with these brands. Of the eight brands that I pitched, six of them said no, but two of them said yes. The only problem was it took about 8 months for me to get an answer, like either a no or a yes. So basically, from January, I've been messaging them saying, like, hey, I'd love to work together. 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 Oh, hey, I'm in your city. Do you want to get coffee? Oh, you don't have a budget yet? No worry. Great to like build this relationship. And I've done that for like basically from like the beginning of the year. And just recently, we've like on two of the brands, I've like closed the deal. And financially, it's worth it because I've made enough money to recoup that time. But that's just an example of like how much time it took to close that. So that's like one approach I would take, where it's almost like every single week, in the same way that you're going to record one episode, every single week you're going to send 3 outbound emails, and 2 of those 3 you send are probably going to say no, but one of the 3 is probably going to say maybe. Let's keep talking about it. And then at that point, it's just a matter of like time. That's like the first approach I would take, just reaching out to brands a discipline. And so it's less about what they may say and more about you just like building the act of like reaching out to them. That's like part one. And then part two, if you want to get money sooner, right, and you don't want to wait that 8 months, a simple way to do that is just to continue to lower the bar. So you reach out to someone, you say, will you be a sponsor? And it doesn't even have to be a business. Reach out to creators like myself, right? Like I have a newsletter, right? Like I would love to sponsor your podcast, right? And so you reach out to me, you say, hey, Lloyd, would you like to be a sponsor? It's going to cost you $500. And transparently, I would tell you that's like a bit too high than what I could pay for right now. But then you say, great, no problem. What about 250? I may say, let me think about it, get back to you. And if I can do that, great. If not, then you just know, okay, great. Would you do 175? And I would just do that with different businesses. And I think if people are saying no to the price, generally speaking, I think you could lower it enough to where the barrier for them to do it is low. So like, I think people paying $100 a month for sponsorship is a no-brainer because that's only $25 an episode. And if you buy coffee, that's more than your coffee budget, right? So I think maybe like $250 a month, $300 a month sounds good. And I recently started a newsletter and I don't have that many subscribers yet. And that's about what I've been charging, $75 a week. And if you do it for a whole month, then you could pay $50 a week.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, and I signed up to on LinkedIn also. I signed up to
I saw that. Thank you.
your newsletter and everything, because again, I'm one of those that I love to learn from those that have gone ahead of me and those that have already put in that work, but that I can learn from as well. And again, and that's the whole purpose of the show too. The mission, the vision, and the passion is to bring creatives and educators to connect one show at a time. And of course, taking those knowledge nuggets that you're sharing today and sprinkling them on to what they are already doing great to really get 1% better. So everything that you're sharing today, I'm definitely taking it, and I'm gonna definitely get better at doing those things. And again, Amanda was stating here, it's like, hey, you need to be brave, Fonz. I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I do need to be a little bit braver. And Amanda here, she says, I think there's great growth opportunities in reflecting on what you've done as well, so you can formulate a plan of action. Excellent.
Yeah, Amanda's been posting great gems all episode.
Yes, definitely. She's definitely dropped some gems too as a previous guest as well. So she's
Nice.
she's wonderful. All right, excellent. So now let's talk a little bit about, okay, so we talked about possibly getting some sponsorships and so on. So now as far as the social media aspect, okay, so what are some of your, I guess, beginner tips? I know we've talked about being consistent, but are there any specific platforms that you may put over others. So tell us a little bit about how Lloyd kind of think through your process for social media repurposing.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think the only disclaimer I'll give is I'm very, very flexible. I move very fast. I make decisions very fast, and I change very, very, very fast. I could say today that, hey, TikTok is my favorite platform, and next month I'll change my entire strategy. And YouTube Shorts is my favorite platform. I like trying different things. I like exploring, and I like throwing stuff on the wall and seeing what sticks. And so I think that in terms of podcasting, social media is important. And I just want to state why, and then it'll be a little easier for me to help people with what platform. Podcasting itself doesn't have great discoverability just yet. And discoverability just means when you put something into the world, wherever you put it, that platform is going to expose new people that don't know about you to that thing. So podcasting doesn't have that yet. If you create a podcast and you're just putting it on your podcast platforms like Apple or Spotify, not that many new people are going to find you. Some new people will still find you, but not that many. And so social media platforms like YouTube Shorts or TikTok or Instagram Reels, these platforms expose you to a lot more people. So for instance, if you just post like 3 videos a week on your social platforms, those platforms are going to push it out to people that don't know about you and make it easier for them to find you. And that's like the real goal as a podcaster, that you want to have a social media channel. And so with that in mind, there's a few questions you want to ask yourself, like, which platform is going to give me the best discoverability? Which platform is going to give me the best ability to build a community? Which platform is going to give me the best ability to monetize and own my audience? And so TikTok is great for being exposed to as many people as possible, but it's really hard to build a real community or to take your audience off of the platform or to get them to buy something. Instagram Reels is great for building community, but you're not going to get as much discoverability. And so when people follow you on Instagram and they see you post stuff, they're more likely to engage and comment. They like following you. It feels like a community, but you're just not going to grow as fast as you would on TikTok. YouTube Shorts is great for discoverability. Certainly not as much discoverability as TikTok, and certainly not as much community as Instagram, but they're the most likely to help you monetize your content quickly. And so for when I started in December, everything I posted on TikTok, I also put on YouTube Shorts just to see like how it would work. And just in me posting like the same content, I grew from maybe 0 to 200 and something subscribers in like I think maybe like 5 to 6 months ish. And so I felt like that was pretty good. To be able to monetize on YouTube, you need at least 1,000 followers and at least 4,000 watch hours. And so there's certainly a large ability to make money on YouTube.
Excellent. Those are some great tips. And, and myself too, I very much like you described yourself, I will try just about anything and put myself out anywhere that people might be able to see. And of course, you see that some platforms do perform a little bit better than others. And also depending on the niche as well. I find that on YouTube Shorts, my unboxing videos do way better than any of the podcast clips. But then on TikTok, the podcast clips do a lot better than any of the unboxing videos and so on, just because, of course, the algorithms and so on push things out to certain, niches and so on. So that kind of helps out a lot. But very much like you, I'm not fearful of experimenting. It's just really, you just kind of have to find that right formula, and it just all depends on where it's going to hit, and then you just continue moving through there. But again, I think for myself, it's just exploring that and being part of the creative process really just keeps me on my toes, and it just really gets me excited about what I'm doing, because oftentimes people ask me on the show, there's a question that I ask at the end of the show, and a lot of people ask me, it's like, how do you do what you do? I mean, you have a full-time job and you're going to school, doing your doctorate, and then you're doing this. I said, it's just my passion. I make time for it because for myself, this is my self-care, honestly, being able to converse and learn about what I'm passionate about, and just to be ready in season and out of season and be able to share those nuggets with other people as well, and what works. And so that's really what's helped me out, and being consistent. But again, I don't mind being out there, putting myself out there on any platform at all
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Same
Uh,
here. I agree with that approach.
Excellent. Yeah, like Amanda says, yeah, it fills my cup. Exactly. All right. So just one last question before, we kind of start wrapping up, because I do want to honor our time, but it's just been a great conversation. And I know that myself being just like so excited about everything I've heard. I know that our audience members that are listening or will rewatch the episode will
Mm.
definitely glean from it. But as far as repurposing content, your clips and so on and so forth, aside not so much the social media aspect, but how do you, I guess, work that out as far as, how do you know what clips to take? Do you do that on your own, or are you at a point now where you can kind of, outsource that to just continue to keep your content evergreen? Any tips on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I certainly have a team of people that help me break down that content, which makes it a little easier. But I am still responsible for telling them, like, hey, minute 23, second 14 to 30 seconds after, can you cut that and make that a clip? And so I have a team that'll break down those clips. What I have been trying to get better at, though, is just figuring out the best way to display that content on social media so that it's engaging as possible. And just some of the tips that I found is I find that the tips that do the best, that potentially go viral, are tips with no context, where it almost feels like you just drop someone in the middle of a conversation and they're trying to like find their way and figure out like what you're talking about. And so I find that clips with no context that are interesting, that are less than about 20 seconds, perform really well.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. And it's funny because, like you said, every podcaster does things differently. Or
Right.
we have a mutual friend who, when I talk to him, he's like, "Oh, you need to make sure you give context, and you need to make
Yep.
sure you do this." But I think that it's great that you get so many different ideas from so many people, and not necessarily one is going to work more than the other. It just all depends, how it hits and how people, take that. So that's kind of what I love about this process too, that really excites me, is just that creative component of, you created something that you feel is going to hit, and sometimes people are like, nah, like that really didn't hit. And then sometimes you put in, just something that 20 seconds that you think, nobody's going to care, and then all of a sudden it's just boom,
Right.
it hits. So that just keeps it exciting for me
Yeah,
too
it
as
does.
well. And those are some of the things that I love. All right, so I do want to ask, before we kind of wrap up, because I know you've had tremendous success. You've had so many followers because of everything that you share. You're so transparent in your setups. You're transparent in how you podcast. You're out there, you're outside podcasting, you're indoors. You pretty much talk to anybody and you share that wisdom on podcasting. But I recently saw a post where you were outside, or you were getting into a studio,
Okay.
possibly somewhere. I don't know if we can talk about that. I know that you put it out there, and for I guess another platform where maybe you did, maybe kind of like a class that you might have worked on. I don't know if you're able to talk about that, or maybe just share just a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly can. So a few months ago, I was LinkedIn reached out to me and said like, "Hey, we love your content. This is great. Would you be interested in leading a podcast course on our behalf?" And I was like, "Oh, this is." I mean, I couldn't even believe it was happening. And so worked with them. I like auditioned, and then I had to work with them to create an outline, create a script. We've basically been working on this for like about 6 months, and then last week we were finally done and clear to record. So they flew me out to California, spent a week there recording the course, and the course comes out early Q1 2023. And the course is centered around the easiest possible way to start your podcast using Anchor. And so I'm so excited about it. They obviously really care about educating people. And so the moment it comes out, I'm excited to share it with people. They're doing great work, and I was really excited for like that opportunity.
That is amazing. That is something that I love. And when I saw that, I was like, it just really goes to show just the work that you've put in everything that you've done, and sharing and just putting yourself out there. And again, the more you put yourself out there, people see you as that thought leader. They see you, you mentioned the podcast guy and so on. But, it's just wonderful to see that and see that success. And I was very excited when I saw that post. I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing, and again, like I said, because I follow you on social media. And then I saw, when you're the little clip where you're walking into the studio,
Yep.
I'm like, wow, this is wonderful. This is amazing. And I just want to congratulate you for that, because I know that this is going to be something that's going to be wonderful for, like I mentioned, my friends that may be interested in podcasting that just don't know where to start. This is going to be a great resource for so many people that would love to get into this space and to help them be, consistent, overcome, those obstacles that they may have, whether it's mental roadblocks or just podcasting roadblocks. I think I can think of another guy that would do such a great job at explaining this as you. So congratulations again on that, my friend. That is some wonderful, wonderful news.
I really, really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. And I just think, I definitely don't want to underscore just creating content in general, the types of opportunities you find and the places it'll take you. Just, no one can imagine, where these creating content will take you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lloyd. I really appreciate the time that you took today to join my show and just to share all those knowledge nuggets that so many people are definitely going to glean from. And I'm just really excited about that. But before we wrap up, I always love to end the show on these last three questions. And of course, now I'm going to adapt the question to the podcasting space, which
Okay.
is this first question. And so normally I always like to ask, in the current state of podcasting, what would you say is your current podcast kryptonite?
Mm.
What is
Um,
your current podcast kryptonite?
and I need to understand what a kryptonite is.
Oh,
I don't know.
kryptonite. Okay, so Superman is a superhero, and kryptonite is what makes him weak.
Mm,
So, in this moment, what would you say is your podcast kryptonite?
yeah, I'd say that there's been these sort of like nano podcasts that are so easy to consume. It's almost like addicting because instead of just listening to like one per week, you probably listen to like 4 or 5 a day. And so I just find that so much of my time goes to like listening to that content. So I'd say that's been like my podcast kryptonite.
Ah, there you go. Excellent. Can you just elaborate a little bit about those nano podcasts?
Yeah, like I think historically an average podcast has been between like an hour to maybe a little more, maybe 45 minutes. But people have been doing these smaller episodes, maybe like 8 to 10 minutes, and they might do them daily. My friend Henry is a great example of that. He'd actually be a great person for you to interview, but he gets like 40 to 50,000 downloads per month just doing that. It's just like a daily podcast, 8 to 10 minutes every single day, and it's just so much easier to consume.
Excellent. I like that. I'm definitely going to have to look into that and definitely going to have to connect with Henry. That way he might be able to be a guest and share also on podcasting. All right. So question number 2, Lloyd, if you can have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
If I could have a billboard with anything on it, the billboard would say "Drink more water." And I've just been obsessed with trying to figure out tips and tricks to help people drink more water. If I could do anything and I didn't have to make money, that's what I would be talking about: how to get people to drink more water.
Excellent. Now, what would be the reason behind that?
I just think that I personally hate drinking water, and I now know that there's just lots of tangible tips that you can do that will help you increase your water intake. For example, whenever you drink out of your bottle, don't drink less than 10 sips. Every time you drink, make sure it's at least 10 sips. Or whenever you buy a bottle, make sure it fits in your car cup holder so that you can take it anywhere. So there's just, I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on with these.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. And the last question, let's say that this was your show this morning and I was a guest on your show. What would be one question you'd like to ask me?
Yeah. I would ask you how you balance everything that you're doing. Like practically, like how do you balance everything?
It's just the most practical thing is just finding those shortcuts. I think and since April 20th, 20, the workflow for podcasting and of course life in general and work and school, you know, I have to kind of take shortcuts and just find
Mm,
ways to really automate a lot of the process. So for the podcasting, for the most part, like I said, oftentimes I have to be the one that was DMing and reaching out, and I still do. But now, luckily, because a lot more people are familiar with the show, I
yep.
do get a lot of messages that come in. So I do that helps in cutting down the process. So for myself, it's like apps like Calendly have helped out so much, just being able to stay organized, my Google Calendar. Of course, just my workflow for my podcast post production, everything's done on Anchor, Descript. That those
Yep.
things make things so much easier. And of course, I still have to do more of the content creation on my, as far as cutting clips and so on. But hopefully in the future, like I said, once we start reaching out to some people, maybe I'll be able to outsource that and get those clips. But really, what it all comes down to is like what Amanda says. It's just really also just my passion for what I do.
Yeah.
I give 110% to everything that I do and find that balance in everything because I want to do everything to the best of my capabilities. And sometimes, yeah, it feels like a lot of work. And sometimes you feel like, "Ah, do I really need to do this?" But the more consistent I am, and then I'm here on a Saturday, this conversations like this, being able to put this kind of content out, really just this is what my why, this is
Yeah.
my passion, and it fuels that to continue being consistent and putting out content. And the fact that my schooling is almost done, and then
Yep.
I have semesters where they're a little bit easier than others, and then I have those long breaks in between semesters. That's really when I get going and start trying. Sometimes I'll even do 2 episodes a week if I
Wow.
can, because I love being consistent and I want people to hear other people's stories,
Right.
and that's what drives me. So, yeah, I mean, it really not a whole lot there as far as I wish I can give you a clearer answer, but the way my mind and brain works, it's just that's really what it is. It's just
Yeah.
ultimately comes down to passion.
I love that. No, that I certainly see that passion beaming from you.
Excellent. Well, Lloyd, thank you so much again, as always, for being a guest on My EdTech Life. And I'm just thankful for everything that you shared. And being a guest on My EdTech Life, you are now a member of my PLF, my personal learning family. And you always have an open invitation anytime you ever want to come back, where you want to share a project, or you want to share an idea, or you want to share something that you're working on. You always have an available seat, an available platform for you to share the amazing work that you're doing. But before we go, if you don't mind, Lloyd, please make sure you let our followers know where they can go ahead and contact you, where they can connect with you. So please feel free to share.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. For anyone that listened to this episode that would love to connect, you can find me on my website, which is bigcreator.energy. That's bigcreator.energy. You can also find me on all social platforms at Lloyd, not George. And that's at Lloyd, not George.
Excellent. So yeah, I popped in the website here in the chat. So that'll be also in the show notes, guys. And I just want to share this message from Sherry. Thank you so much, Sherry, who's also a longtime listener on LinkedIn. She says, I look forward to your Saturday. It's the beginning of a great and productive weekend. So thank you so much, Sherry. And again, I really appreciate all the supporters. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much, Lloyd, as also. And for all of you that are going to be catching this episode on replay, as always, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for making My EdTech Life what it is today. Please make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and all the other 149 amazing episodes too, as well, where you can go ahead and learn so much from educators and creatives that you can apply to either your professional or personal life. And again, as always, remember that our mission, our vision, and our passion is to connect educators and creatives one show at a time. Make sure you stop by our store as well. We've got some great merch. We've got some caps, stickers, sweaters. So make sure for this winter season, you definitely get yourself a nice sweater. So make sure that you visit our store, get yourself some My EdTech Life merch. And as always, my friends, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And don't forget, as always, my friends, stay techie.